Welcome Federal State Affairs. Before we get started, we will have just a quick overview. We will be hearing Senate Bill 208 and 210. We'll take 208 first, but before we get to that, we've got some bill introductions, I understand, and we'll open the floor for bill introductions. Let's hit Senator Peterson here first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce a bill 23 RS 1213. It's an act concerning trains relating to length and minimum distance of storage of rolling stock.
Committee, any discussion or objections to introduction of this bill? Seeing none, that is introduced. Now to the floor for bill introduction. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I have bill number RS 23. Wait, let me just start over. My name's Sarah Stormont, and I have bill 23 RS 1228 for introduction on behalf of the Human Solution Foundation. This bill is dealing with industrial hemp products in the state of Kansas.
Okay. Committee, any discussion or objections to introduction? Seeing none, that is introduced.
Thank you.
Any other bill introductions? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two. The first one is RS 0881, authorizing compassionate release for inmates who meet the requirements. That's in regard to the John Keith Calvin case.
Okay. Committee, any discussion or objections to introduction? Seeing none, that's introduced. Next.
RS 1155. That expands the silver alert system to include folks 18 and over with developmental disabilities who may wander.
Okay. Committee, any discussions or objections to introduction of that bill? Seeing none, that is introduced. Jason, was there an issue with that number or? Oh, both of those were approved last week. Okay, very good. Any other bill introductions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the RS number right now, but are you taking bill introductions again at the end of our meeting or tomorrow?
We will do it tomorrow. We'll introduce tomorrow also before we work any bills.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none, we will then open. We will then open the hearing on Senate Bill 208, if I can get my microphone on. And with that, we will turn to Jason Long, our advisor, for an overview of Senate Bill 208. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 208 deals with elections and specifically with returning advance voting ballots via a remote ballot box. This is colloquially referred to as those ballot drop boxes. The bill would regulate the use of those drop boxes by county election officials. Currently, there are no statutory provisions regulating the use of these ballot boxes. The bill terms them remote ballot boxes and would limit each county office the use of one remote ballot box during each election. There are requirements that the box must be located inside the county election office and be continuously observed by two individuals who are of different political party affiliations. It may also only be open and accessible for voters to use during the hours when the county election office is open. On the day of the election is to be closed at 7 p.m. except that if any voter is in line to use the remote box, ballot box, by 7 o'clock, then they are allowed to go ahead and deposit their advance voting ballot into the box. There would also be a requirement that there be signage posted on each ballot box stating the statutory limit for transmitting an advance voting ballot on behalf of another voter and the penalty for violation of that statute. There's direction for the Secretary of State to adopt rules and regs to implement these provisions, and the bill would go into effect on July 1st of this year. So I will answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jason. Committee, any questions? We'll note there's a fiscal note. It indicates, Secretary of State indicates it would implement this bill using existing resources. Any fiscal effect associated with SB 208 is not reflected in the governor's budget report. Counties did indicate it might incur a little additional labor costs. Okay, committee, conferees. We're going to run this bill hearing. We have 2 bill hearings today, so we're going to run this for 30 minutes. I'm going to give 15 minutes to each side. I'm not going to restrict any individual conferee to a specific time limit, but to the extent that the conferees can respect the additional conferee's time, that would be wonderful. So we're going to start with our oral opponents. We'll give 15 minutes, and first up is Chris Kobach, our Attorney General. Mr. Attorney General, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. You said oral opponents. I assume you meant proponents.
I did mean proponents. I misspoke.
Yeah,
Sorry
I'm coming
about that.
before you today in favor of this bill, and I'm here as the Kansas Attorney General, but I'm also here as the former Secretary of State who oversaw Kansas elections for 8 years. Fraud involving the harvesting of ballots, or ballot harvesting it's typically called, is a very real thing. And drop boxes make this type of fraud easier to perpetrate. And as one of the officials charged with the enforcing of our election crimes, I believe that we should make this crime enforceable. In the status quo, our current crime against delivering more than 10 ballots, I believe, is virtually unenforceable. So let me just go to what Kansas current law says. It's KSA 25-2437A1C. One sentence. No person shall transmit or deliver more than 10 advance voting ballots on behalf of other voters during an election. End quote. If that crime occurs, it's the Attorney General's responsibility to prosecute, along with the county attorneys and the Secretary of State. But if you have unmonitored drop boxes, that crime is easy to commit without any detection whatsoever. The type of crime, ballot harvesting, occurs with significant regularity. With this crime, the perpetrator harvests ballots, meaning he collects as many advance ballots as possible. You can do this in a number of ways. You can intercept them at the mailbox. You can go door to door in neighborhoods where voters might be inclined to do this and pay people for their advance ballot. You can ask people for their advance ballot. But the bottom line is you acquire them and then you deliver them, and you deliver them en masse. And sometimes, depending on how the scheme is operated, the perpetrator will try to discern if a ballot has already been voted. Usually they collect ballots that are not yet voted. They ask the person to sign the envelope, and then before it's being sealed. And then they go ahead and fill the ballot out for them. But in some cases, they collect ballots that are already filled out, and they attempt to determine which way the ballot went. There's no dispute on this type of fraud. Obviously, the existence of election fraud is the subject of much debate, but there's bipartisan agreement that this type of fraud does occur. And I would point no further than North Carolina's 9th congressional district election of 2018. In that case, Republican operatives committed this fraud. They used a ballot harvesting scheme to fraudulently increase the number of votes for the Republican candidate Mark Harris. An operative working for Harris's campaign named Leslie Dowless Jr. paid workers $125 for every 50 mail-in ballots they could collect in Bladen and Robeson counties, and then turn into him. He then filled them out, cast them for the Republican. In the end, Democrat Dan McCready lost by 905 votes. However, the North Carolina Election Board detected the fraud and unanimously refused to certify the election and called for a special election to redo that vote, basically. Both parties in Congress agreed that fraud occurred. Democrat Speaker Pelosi said the following, quote, "This is bigger than one seat. This is about undermining the integrity of our elections. What was done there was so remarkable. In that person, those entities got away with it," end quote. Special election was held. Representative Dan Bishop was elected against McCready. He was a different Republican running for the same seat in the redo election. He won, and he's still serving in that seat today. Now, you might say, well, Kansas hasn't seen a successful episode of ballot harvesting flipping a seat. That is true. However, we have seen evidence of it. Right before I became Secretary of State in either the 2008 or 2010 election cycle, Wyandotte County reported that more than 50 people had complained that their ballots, that they had not requested an absentee ballot, but an absentee ballot had been delivered anyway, either to their home or they went to the election office to vote on election day, and they were told that they'd already voted their ballot. What appears to have been happening is that other people were fraudulently requesting your ballot for you. And that's why, when we drafted the SAFE Act in 2011, It was in direct response to what happened in Wyandotte County. We required the signature on the requesting form. When you request an absentee ballot, now your signature has to be verified. But of course, that's just one half of the ballot harvesting scheme. The one way is to get the ballots, then the other way is, of course, you have to drop them off without being caught. And we did not address the second half of the ballot harvesting scheme, the dropping off of large numbers of advanced ballots. But the fact that so many, that 50 people noticed that someone else had asked for their advanced ballot probably meant, we don't know for sure, but probably meant that there were more than 50 total. Some people just didn't report it. And it could have been an intention to intercept them at the ballot box. It could have been an intention just to artificially inflate the turnout in those neighborhoods. We don't know. But it certainly was a smoking gun that suggested that there was a ballot harvesting scheme afoot. Okay. As I said, Kansas law makes the delivery of more than 10 ballots a crime. But right now, if you're using an unmonitored drop box, no one can tell whether you dropped off 10, 20, 200 ballots. There's just, you can drop off as many as you want if it's unmonitored. Now, in contrast, if you use a county election office to hand in your ballots ahead of time, or the ballots of your family members or others who might, a small number of other people who might be asking you to deliver the ballot, there's somebody there receiving them. And so the county clerk might notice, hey, this guy came in yesterday and dropped off 10 ballots, yet here he is again. There's at least some monitoring. Now, opponents of the bill will say, but we already have mailboxes. And aren't mailboxes just as unsecure as drop boxes? Yes, but there are two deterrents to using the mail as an alternative to a drop box. The first is cost. The cost of postage at 63 cents a letter. If you're trying to do a scheme with 1,000 ballots, that's $630. If you've got unlimited money, that may not be a deterrent, but it is certainly one deterrent. The second is that it is a federal crime to use the U.S. Postal Service to perpetrate this fraud. So you bring in the possibility of federal prosecution as well. So yes, mailboxes do present some threat, but they are not as great a threat as the unmonitored drop boxes. Finally, I just want to suggest a couple of amendments. The first section in 1A says the county shall have one monitored drop box as subsequently described in the statute. I think it should be may. It should be up to the county whether they want to have the one or not have the one. And then the second suggested correction, I think there might be a typo. Section 1A states, I believe correctly, such remote ballot boxes shall be located inside the county election office. However, 1E says remote ballot box does not include any ballot boxes located in a county election office. So there's a contradiction between 1A and 1E. It's probably just a typo, but someone would want to fix that. So bottom line is there's certainly a risk. It makes our crime of ballot harvesting unenforceable the more unmonitored drop boxes we have. So the question is, what would be the cost-benefit analysis? Why would you go ahead and do it anyway and increase that risk? Well, the argument is, well, we just want to make it as easy to vote as possible. Well, I would say that argument proves too much. You could have internet voting. That would make it easier. You could have text voting. That would make it easier, but we don't do it because there's a security risk. Well, here, it's already very easy to vote in Kansas. You can vote on Election Day. You can vote by mail 20 days in advance. You can vote in person at the county election office. You can vote in person at a satellite election office. It's very easy to vote. So to add this one additional measure, which makes our crime of ballot harvesting unenforceable, I would say fails the cost-benefit analysis. So at the end of the day, I think you have to decide, do we want to keep our crime against ballot harvesting? And if you do you want it to be enforceable or unenforceable? I would say that crimes in the Kansas statute books should be enforceable ones, and that's why this bill is a good thing, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. General. We'll hold for questions till after all the oral opponents, or oral proponents. It's Monday, folks. Next up is Michelle Eagleman, private citizen. Michelle, are you in the, there we are. And just to note, we've got about 7 minutes left, so.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak. There was a Gallup poll in 2019 that asked respondents if they had confidence in the honesty of elections, and surprisingly, only 40% of Americans answered yes. It's fair to say that number has risen significantly amidst the controversy surrounding the last few elections. This has been constant for both Democrats and Republicans, and as Attorney General Kobach pointed out, there are Democrats who don't like the situation either. The ostensible reason for the drop boxes was the COVID emergency, and I would argue that that's done. 2 years later, our county continued to solicit mail-in voter ballots and also place drop boxes. But those measures weaken election integrity. This is a problem that's avoidable. We can't control 100% of fraud. We can certainly make elections more secure than they are now by eliminating this element. Even if they were well-intentioned, I believe they've run their course and found to be problematic. I was a poll watcher in 2020, and in 2022, I took the plunge and became a poll worker. I was a little nervous because I didn't obviously want to do anything wrong, and we all went to training with the county clerk, which was extremely thorough, very strict. I have my training manual here, and I highlighted every Kansas statute in there because everything we were supposed to do or not do was authorized by a Kansas statute. And on voting day, we had to see voter ID, make sure names were correct, or they had to fill out a separate form. Even if your apartment number had changed, we had to send you to the provisional table. So even when people brought in their ballot, we had to do something different, whether the ballot envelope was opened or closed. So it was very, very strict. And I just want to juxtapose that with the drop box that was outside the clerk's office where we had this training, which was completely unmonitored all the time. And so I feel like, you know, as a poll worker, here we are learning what to do and what not to do according to the law, very strict. We're straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel because that drop box sits out there. And I've heard in our county that provisionals get voted basically all of them get counted. Well, do you think the county that counts all provisional votes is going to check every signature? I mean, this basically is the honor system. There were hundreds of voters who came through the line on election day when I was working, and everyone was concerned with the same thing, that they do everything right so that their vote counted. We even had a man who insisted on staying until the polls closed so he could see what we did with the machine. Every vote cast illegally is one of those citizens whose vote is effectively canceled. Fraud disenfranchises citizens, and it's also very demoralizing. As a precinct committee woman, I've canvassed my neighborhood, and that is one of their biggest concerns is what does it matter at the end of the day if our votes don't count? So if we want confidence in our election system, surely we can do better than 40%. We need more election integrity, not less. And it's for these reasons that I wholeheartedly support SB 208.
Thank you, Michelle. Our final oral proponent is Madeline Melissa, joining us via WebEx, and Madeline's a visiting fellow of Opportunity Solutions Project. Madeline, are you online? You have about 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Thompson and honorable members of the committee. My name is Madeline. I'm a visiting fellow at OSP. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We work in more than 40 states across the country with one clear goal: to help more Americans achieve the American dream. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today in support of SB 208. Security and oversight are crucial to successful election administration and voter confidence in election results. As the Attorney General testified this morning, Kansas law currently has no requirements that protect voters who choose to use remote ballot boxes to cast their ballots. SB 208 will provide these security measures, and it will greatly increase voter confidence in the advanced voting process. The requirements will ensure that ballots are protected from potential tampering, theft, or even weather-related destruction. It will also provide clarity for election officials who are tasked with deploying and administering them, particularly those in rural and geographically large districts. As has been said, ballot boxes were largely unused before the 2020 election, and states across the country have recently enacted similar drop box reforms. States like Missouri and South Carolina have prohibited their use outright, and other states have taken similar measures presented to you in this bill this morning, like Iowa and Ohio. The common sense solutions will add a high level of accountability to the election process. Kansas voters should have confidence that regardless of how they cast their ballots, their votes will count. For all those reasons, I urge you to support this legislation. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Madeline. I think what we're going to do is, if Madeline, if you can hold, and Mr. Attorney General and Michelle, I think we'll go ahead and restart the clock on the oral opponents. We do have neutral, we have a number of written proponents, committee. There's about 10 of them or so. Then we have 2 neutral written only testimonies from Mike Brown and Jill O'Connor. And then we will open for questions after we hear the 15 minutes of the oral opponents. Will give us a committee about 5 minutes for questions after that. So with that, we will go to our oral opponents. And first is Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator and Chairman. Sorry. Been a while since I've been in the legislature. Our written testimony is before you, and it lines up most of our position. But we've been really vocal on supporting drop boxes, and a lot of the concerns that were raised by Attorney General, most of which is out of state. And actually, in the SAFE Act, it wasn't just a signature, it is a voter ID component to get that ballot. So I tell folks, you can't print off a ballot, throw it in a drop box and have it count, because you have the alphanumeric or the barcode or the paperweight. And even if you did, do you have the security envelope? And even if you have the security envelope, that person has to ask for the ballot before that ballot would count. Otherwise, it'd be provisional and the Board of Canvassers would throw it out. And then you have to be able to match your signature. And then you also have to know their driver's license number. And I don't even know my driver's license number, let alone 1,000 other people's driver's license. So we are very secure in Kansas. And I don't know of any drop boxes that are unmonitored. Just because you can't see the camera does not mean they're monitored. Someone tried to test this in one of our counties, to which the county sheriff's office quickly descended and stopped them. This doesn't solve a problem. You eliminate drop boxes, which will push ballots that are legally cast by citizens of our states that are in fact voters that have been verified that did request their advanced mail ballot, to put it in the mail. And why in God's green earth would you want the federal post office or the federal government in charge of your ballot? I got a Christmas card last week. I was sharing with the Ford County clerk how Russell County got a ballot from the 2020 election 6 months late. And she said last summer, she goes, I got one a year and a half late. Because in southwest Kansas, your mail goes to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Other folks who deal with bulk mailing know there's places called black holes. Memphis, Tennessee is a great example. Mail goes in, but it don't come out. And this is why you don't want that federal control. And this is a one-size-fits-all. It undoes local control. We've been adamant, and this is why I was a big opponent to SR1 and SB1 in the Congress, because we've believed in Kansas for years that elections should be ran locally, administered locally, and funded locally, which is why I'm against the federal money that goes pouring into the states, because I have to then determine who gets that money, and I'd rather just the local people pay for their elections. It's an absolute function of local government. But when you push it towards the mail, most ballots will leave the state of Kansas. And it's monitored, they will be handled by federal employees that are not subject to Kansas law. Whereas when you do use these drop boxes, and we have a bill in the House we've introduced to allow us to have regulatory standards just to make sure it's more agile than the structure of statute, so that we can have that security measure, but the post office is not. And postage at 63 cents, when you're willing to pay all it takes to commit fraud through ballot harvesting, the 63 cents is nothing. And so between the SAFE Act, between measures we've done the last year, this has not been an issue overwhelming in Kansas. And it's sometimes a debate coming outside the state, coming in. And I've had states saying, how do you do voter ID for advanced mail ballots? Well, we've been doing it for years. And it's not that difficult. Over 99% of them are just driver's licenses. And then we can work with the DMV to verify that that voter is in fact who they say they are. So I would say this is a compromise in security, election security, which we've been big advocates for election security, because we treat it like network security. You're just constantly looking for ways people may try to game the system. And if you push it towards one box, you're creating bottlenecks. You can't treat Johnson County the same way you treat Elkhart, Kansas. And so let us have the regulatory authority so we can have the agility to make sure they're secure, as opposed to driving everybody to one location at a choke point, which is unfair for areas like Sedgwick County and Shawnee and Wyandotte County and Johnson County, because we can get the goal of security in drop boxes without eliminating so many that would push them, in fact, to the blue drop boxes, at which point in Johnson County, all those ballots are going to show up in Kansas City, Missouri. So with that, I'll stand with questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Again, we will do questions at the end of the testimony or end of the time here. Next up is Mike Burgess, Disability Rights Center of Kansas. Mike.
Oops, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And I'll try and be very brief. This is my written testimony. And as you've heard me talk before, as Disability Rights Center, we're here to advocate on behalf of people with disabilities and try and educate policymakers so you can be aware where there's impacts to people with disabilities. And unfortunately, with the changes in this bill, it makes the drop boxes for individuals with mobility challenges that much harder. In my testimony, too, I talk about individuals that have had personal care attendants and others that provide overnight care, including veterans. And those are individuals who would also be negatively impacted by the provisions of this bill. And again, as we talked about before, you know, going to your mailbox is not a simple thing for a lot of individuals with disabilities. It's not a matter of just putting a stamp on the envelope, signing the affidavits, and dropping it in the mail. So please, I just ask you to keep that in mind as you're making this and other changes that might make it more difficult for individuals with disabilities to have their vote cast. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, Mike. Up next is Davis Hammett of Loud Light Civic Action. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Glad I could be here in person today. First, I just want to really ask sort of what is the justification? Because we heard some loose things that extrapolate from things that happened years ago in other states, but there was no specific problem in Kansas that was identified. I also quickly want to mention, because I mentioned it last week, that actually the limit on someone assisting 10 people in casting their mail ballot, that's currently at the Court of Appeals. That includes a group of nuns that are suing because it's messed up how they assist each other in their group living situation and returning the ballots. So you might be right now trying to solve a problem or try to enforce a law that might be about to be struck down as unconstitutional any day. I also want to just mention a couple of the technical concerns on this. The Attorney General brought up how Section E and A actually contradict each other. I don't understand how the bill would be workable because the definitions essentially go in the opposite direction, so it's unclear what a county would do with this. Also, there's some technical concerns in Section E because it appears to make it so that you couldn't return your advanced mail ballot to a poll site on Election Day because of the language. So I think even if you moved forward with this, there's a lot of sort of technical cleanup that you would need to make sure that counties knew how to even implement it. But really, this would take away evening voting. We're thinking people coming back from, in Wichita, coming back from working at a manufacturing plant, and now they can't just stop by the drop box, whenever they're working a night shift and just drop it in. This is going to reduce a lot of access. Last year, it was brought up in a similar bill how some counties do pay for postage to be returned, but some don't. And in some, it can cost, $1.50 to return your mail ballot. So this is going to cause all sorts of issues, and we don't really see any clear justification. And I do want to mention that, we've had a situation about, I think it was in 2014, where y'all were told that dead people were voting, and then those people came forward and were like, I'm very much so alive, I'm not dead, right? So you should really make sure that you have a factual basis for what's happening to justify this before moving forward, and I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Davis. Next up is, I think it's Seal King, League of Women Voters. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you have it correct. It's Seal King and with League of Women Voters. And many of our members do poll working. We're election workers, and we also assist at ballot box, drop box to close them at the end of that 7 o'clock on election day and close them and check them in the afternoon. And so we are really opposed to this bill. You're eliminating the access to swaths of Kansans if you put a ballot box, drop box into an office that's only open a few hours a day. For all those people who are in nursing homes, like the sisters that are suing for access, for people who are working out of the area who can't get back by closing time on any day to either vote or drop their ballot within an office. and for those people who can't get out of their car to go in and drop their ballot. And of course, the way the law is written for that 10, if anybody is helping anybody on a ballot return, you have to sign your name. So it has the voter's signature, then your name if you're taking that ballot to a mailbox or a drop box or inside an election office or a polling place. It just really eliminates huge numbers of people who are able to get their ballot in on time. And we appreciate Secretary of State Schwab's testimony that he supports this. And Mike, on disabilities, we note that the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, states a ballot drop box provides a secure and convenient means for voters to return their mail ballot. A drop box is a secure, locked structure operated by election officials where voters may deliver their ballots from the time they receive them in the mail until polls close on Election Day. And they recommend the following. Unstaffed drop boxes are typically available 24 hours a day and permanently anchored in place. At a minimum, have a drop box for every 15,000 to 20,000 voters. Add more drop boxes to areas where there's historically low vote-by-mail usage so that more people have access to actually voting. I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be available to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Seal. Next up is Caleb Smith. Caleb, we're down to about a little less than 4 minutes. Caleb?
Excellent. I'll keep this as short as possible. I'm Caleb Smith with Kansas Appleseed. We're opposing Senate Bill 208. So we're doing this, I'll just state the obvious right at the beginning, because remote ballot drop boxes just help Kansans vote. They help address the effects of potential problems on Election Day, and one recent study has actually shown that they can increase voter turnout by as much as 7%. So my background before I worked at Kansas Appleseed was I worked to help people vote. I was a voter turnout sort of expert. I did it across the country, including North Carolina, Kansas, pretty much every time zone. I did it. I helped people vote. And we were very excited if we can get our turnout up between 5 to 8%. So just a ballot drop box doing it 7% is huge. That doesn't sound like a lot, but just think about that statewide of just 7% increase in voter turnout just by this one simple common sense sort of solution. So probably the biggest problem that we have with this bill particularly, that's sort of already been mentioned, but we'll just sort of hit on it briefly, is that it seems that most of this bill is just targeted to make the ballot boxes less accessible and less useful. They're taking them from outside and they're putting them inside offices where people have to park, where they have to go in, they have to go through security. They can't just pull over, drop something in a box like most of them are now, and it sort of takes away sort of the main feature of making voting more accessible for people who are busy, who have other things going on with their lives, who are just dealing with a host of other challenges more than just how to get their ballots in. Also, this doesn't really address the fact that there's now going to be 2 people from different political parties watching these boxes. I talked to a lot of people in Southeast Kansas, which is where I'm from, about what does that mean, and folks weren't really sure. Are these volunteers? Are these going to be paid like poll workers? Who are these people, and who's going to be responsible for finding them and training them? So I mentioned I worked across the country, increasing voter turnout. Anybody who's worked with volunteers knows that that's a real skill and a real expensive proposition of finding volunteers to work for 20 days, essentially full time. That's not sort of an easy thing to do, and it's not a free or even a cheap thing to do. And to do something as important as helping administer our elections, that's something that, frankly, should have received more consideration, and we hope you do as you consider this bill. So just to sum up, because I know there's other people who want to talk, this bill just makes life harder for election workers and administrators who are already overworked, and finding and recruiting volunteers is a big problem and a big issue. And election clerks should be able just to do what's best for their counties rather than sort of having this one-size-fits-all approach from the state. So with those things, I'll wrap it up, and I'll be available for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Committee, that's all for the oral opponent testimony. We do have a few that we're not able to get to. We also have written-only opponents, and there's a little more than 10 of those, and easy to review those. So with that, I think let's reset. Well, we had time limits. Yeah, we had time limits. So I think let's set this for 5 minutes. Committee, we will open questions for either the proponents or opponents. Please keep the questions nice and tight so we get as many questions in as possible. Any questions, committee? Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to talk really fast. So I adamantly disagree with anyone who says that it's easy to vote. It's not, especially for African-American people in my district, for senior citizens, people with disabilities, and low-income individuals in my district. Mr. Chairman, my questions are for Attorney General Chris Kobach and for Secretary of State Scott Schwab. In your opening statement, Attorney General, you stated that individuals were receiving advance ballots without their request. I actually know for a fact that individuals, because I talk with those in my district, they did not receive any advance ballots from our local Cedric County Election Commission or from the Kansas State Secretary of State's office. Those ballots were coming from Missouri. And so can you elaborate on that? Same question for
The incident I was reporting was not Sedgwick County, it was Wyandotte County. And the Wyandotte County election officer said that they had discovered approximately 50 people who reported it and said somebody requested my absentee ballot and then I didn't request it. We anticipate that the 50 that were reported was a subset of the larger number in that scheme. That would be pretty good evidence that something like a ballot harvesting scheme was afoot. They may be trying to intercept them at the mailboxes. So it is happening in Kansas. It is recent. It's not just other states. And in the SAFE Act, the Secure and Fair Elections Act, which you'll remember, we address the front end of ballot harvesting. And it is absolutely, as I agree with Secretary of State Schwab, we've made it very difficult to get the absentee ballot by requesting somebody else's. But you can still get it the other ways by offering people money for it, going door to door, offering to deliver it, and then either not delivering it or delivering, depending on what you want to do. So the back end, the second half of ballot harvesting is still wide open. And my argument is simply, look, if you want us to enforce this law, then plug this gap, because right now it's unenforceable. Nobody will be able to monitor how many ballots are dropped off, and our 10 limit is hard to enforce.
Secretary Schwab.
Yeah, thank you. And I would argue it doesn't help the enforcement mechanism. It just narrows it down to one box. Those were not ballots that were sent in your community, because we were doing an event when that happened. Those were actually applications for ballots. This body voted a bill that was eventually signed by the governor saying that organizations out of the state cannot automatically send in advanced ballot applications into the state. The federal court has struck that down, and so you're back to where you started as it relates to that, because the biggest issue there is it created folks, because they get 6 or 7 of them, and they had already applied for their advanced mail ballot, and they were wondering if the county had not ever gotten their application because they got another application, which is part of the reason why we have a tracker, so you can see if your application's been received, if your ballot's been sent out, if your ballot's been processed. That way, if it hasn't been processed, getting close to election day, you can call the county election office and adjudicate that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Straub, then Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who wants to answer this question, but when were ballot drop boxes first used in Kansas?
Secretary of State.
I was a representative. I was never a senator. No, 1977.
77. And when have the issues of ballot harvesting, when did those issues appear?
Before then. It used to be called an advanced ballot mail chase before it was called ballot harvesting, but going back to the Civil War, we wanted to make sure Kansans could vote, and so we were one of the first states to do advanced mail ballots so for our military members that were fighting in the Civil War could vote, and often one person in that military unit would collect those ballots to make sure they got sent back to the state.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time for one quick question, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am concerned about the one-size-fits-all approach and how we lose local control with a bill like this, and potentially how it disenfranchises Kansans, as some of the different groups pointed out. Additionally, it was mentioned that on the federal level, as far as the USPS has provisions in place that criminalizes tampering or destruction of a ballot drop box. Why not do that from the legislative level versus actually removing ballot boxes, which takes away the ability for people to vote?
Mr. AG, I think you came up first. Yeah.
Well, the problem right now is there's no monitoring of the drop boxes, which is why we can't do that as you requested. So what was the first part of your question again?
Oh, sure.
I basically mentioned that we could criminalize the tampering of ballot boxes.
Sure, and again, as long as they're unmonitored, it's going to be very difficult. The problem is the lack of monitoring. My point is simply this: if we are going to have a 10 ballot limit of how many ballots you can deliver, then let's not also have a wide open barn door where anybody can violate it by simply dropping off 100 ballots into an unmonitored drop box. It's a very simple point. If we don't want to have the 10 ballot limit, as some of the conferees have said, they don't like it. The ACLU doesn't like it. They're the ones bringing that lawsuit. We're going to win that lawsuit, by the way. There's no constitutional argument, a good one against it. But then if we're going to have a law, let's make it enforceable. Let's not leave in place a massive enforcement loophole.
We're out of time for questions on this, and we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 208. Next, we move on to Senate Bill 210, which allows for nonpartisan candidates for office to include candidates' political party. We'll turn to Jason Long, our reviser, to give us an overview. Thank you, Jason. Go ahead with your, I'm sorry.
I was trying to avoid the
that's a good idea.
noise.
Let the hall noise lie down a little bit on us.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 210 is also a bill concerning elections. This bill amends one statute dealing with the information to be printed on the ballot. Under current law, any candidate for a national, state, county, or township office, which are partisan offices, shall have their political party affiliation added to their name on the ballot. Senate Bill 210 would add language to that provision that would allow a candidate for a nonpartisan office, and this is like school boards, city council member offices, where you don't have to be for a political party or affiliated with a political party to run for the office necessarily. It would allow those candidates to elect to have their political party affiliation included on the ballot if they so choose. And so the candidate for a nonpartisan office would simply notify the county election officer through the appropriate channels that they wanted to include their political party affiliation, and then it would be printed on the ballot with the candidate's name for that election. The bill would go into effect on Kansas Register, so it would be in effect earlier than July 1st of this year. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Questions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, so then it would just be optional, not mandated?
That's correct. So you could conceivably, if you have a Democrat candidate and a Republican candidate, the Democrat may have their political party affiliation listed under their name, while the Republican, it might just be the name only, and there is no party affiliation with that name.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. We're going to allot 20 minutes for this hearing, and just 3 minutes per conferee on this case, so we can be efficient with time, and then we will stand for questions after both sides have spoken. First up is our oral proponent, is Dennis Hull, State Affairs Coordinator for Americans for Tax Reform. And Dennis is on WebEx. Dennis?
Good morning, Chairman Thompson, members of the committee. My name is Dennis Hull. I am with Americans for Tax Reform. We are a DC-based nonprofit which advocates on behalf of taxpayers and consumers throughout the United States. We believe this bill would protect the interests of taxpayers throughout the state of Kansas by ensuring a greater degree of transparency in local elections. These elections often do have consequences for a variety of tax burdens at the local and municipal level, and many voters are already unaware of this fact that thousands of local candidates function as a taxing authority. There are 264 local tax jurisdictions in the state of Kansas alone. This is school boards, townships, city councils, and a host of other bodies. And sometimes these elections are held in off years or in April or June, and voters do not even know that they're taking place. So we believe maximizing the amount of information available to voters in these elections is crucial to ensure they make an informed decision with their vote. Party affiliation or lack thereof can confer a suite of information about where a candidate might fall on issues like property taxes, user fees, spending increases, and the trajectory of local government budgets. So ultimately, candidates can say whatever they want when they're running for office, but making this visible commitment to the principles that are behind a party platform is a different story. The status quo basically forces thousands of candidates to disguise their tax policy preferences behind a mere label of nonpartisanship. And at the very least, ATR believes candidates should have the option to identify with the party of their choosing. So for these reasons, ATR supports a vote in favor of SB 210 and its pursuit of political transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Again, if you'll stay on with us in case there are any questions for you afterward. Adam Peters is our other oral proponent. He's the Ellis County Republican Party chair, also joining us via WebEx. Adam, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead, Adam.
All right. This is a very simple situation for me. If a supermarket were to start stripping labels, people looking for soup would probably go elsewhere. The reason for that isn't hard to understand. People want to know what it is they're getting. And allowing partisan labels to appear on the ballot would give a tremendous amount of transparency to voters. There's two major political parties in this country, and they both have a set of policies that they generally advocate for. Most voters are aware of this. If voters do not know what a candidate stands for at a glance, they're far less likely to show up. Here in my own county, we had an abysmal rate of turnout in our 2021 local elections. Simple fact, 4,000 people actually cast a ballot despite almost 19,000 being eligible. In one case, Kathy Hopkins, who's since been elected to the state school board, lost a race by 5 votes to a left-wing candidate despite our voter rolls being heavily Republican. There's no reason why showing up to the polling station should involve any kind of a guessing game. If you put a letter beside someone's name, that will tell you a whole lot about who they are and what they stand for. And that's particularly important in local races where there often is not a lot of media coverage of candidates or opportunities for candidates to actually get their platform out. So for that reason, I believe it is essential that we give voters an informed choice, and that's why this legislation is crucial.
Thank you, Adam. I cut out just a little bit, but I think we got the essence of your testimony. And if you'll stay online, we will also open for questions after both sides have spoken. We
Yes,
have
sir.
a number of other written, thank you very much. We have a number of other written proponents committee for you to review. And next, we will move on to our neutral oral conferee. We've got Clay Barker, Deputy Assistant to Secretary of State. And Clay will give you 3 minutes also, so if we can reset that real quick, Sheila.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker from the Secretary of State's office. We're neutral on this bill. We understand its purpose and its goal. And having worked in election offices and in parties, you get a lot of questions on nonpartisan races about candidates' political leanings. We had 3 just sort of generic points if you work this bill. First, the phrase, the candidate's political party or political designation. Clearly that means Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, the authorized parties in Kansas, but does it also mean the word unaffiliated, unaffiliated with a party, independent, or even something like MAGA, which some candidates try to insert as a middle name and the counties don't let them do that. Second point, would the clerk, the county election officer, have a duty to verify this, to make sure the person really is associated with the party, or do they just take the candidate's word for it? And last, we could foresee voter confusion if on a ballot some candidates had their party and others it was blank. And the voter may not understand the implications of what that means and then may call up the counties angry or questioning. Mr. Chair, that's all we have, and I'll stand for questions if there are any.
I'll ask just one quick one. Do you have the amendments drawn up to clarify that if we were to work that?
We do not, Mr. Chair, but I could do that very quickly and get it to the reviser if you prefer.
I wouldn't be a bad idea just to have that ready, because we may work these tomorrow. We'll see. Any questions, committee, for Clay before we move on to the written oral opponents? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Clay. Let's reset the clock. Our oral opponents. First up is Davis Hammett, Loud Light Civic Action. Davis, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I first want to mention that this is a preemption issue. So right now, local communities can decide if they want their local races to be partisan or not, and this would be the state legislature taking local control away from those communities on this issue. I'm not sure how this would work out on this, but I do want to flag the concern around the Hatch Act, which prevents federal employees from running in partisan races. This appears to make local races partisan, since now it will be Republicans and Democrats and things listed on the ballot. And this is a situation like, you know, if you're a federal employee, can you run for your kid's school board or not? This might interfere with that. And then again, something that was mentioned, I think last week or maybe the week before in here, was a sort of issue of polarization we have. Local issues are local issues. A lot of them do not lend themselves so much to Republican or Democrat. You know, I would imagine that plenty of y'all kind of campaign and are like, I don't care about Republican or Democrat issues. I care about our community issues. Well, this will that will kind of take that away if all of these things just become Republican or Democrat for every single race in here. And that's a pretty substantial choice, especially when y'all are making it for other communities and not allowing local communities to make it for themselves. And then last, I did have some technical questions, but I think the Secretary of State's office mentioned that. Just sort of how this would be defined, what would be the time limits on when someone can declare this, how would this show up on the ballot, and details like that. But I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Davis. Next up, John Goodyear, General Counsel for League of Kansas Municipalities. John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. My name is John Goodyear. I'm the General Counsel for the League of Kansas Municipalities. Grateful for the opportunity to come before you today and to speak in opposition to Senate Bill 210. The primary functions that cities serve is to provide services in their community and to act in ways that protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. Very few decisions that we're going to make over a year or over 4 years, over a term, are going to have partisan underpinnings. The oft-repeated adage, but it bears repeating, is that there aren't Republican and Democrat potholes, there aren't red and blue potholes, there's just potholes that need to be fixed. And that's not to trivialize what cities do, but I care far more about my access to clean water and clean water running through my city's mains than I care about the governing body that makes the decisions on how we work on water projects. So something else to highlight here is that the League has a policy statement directed by our cities, and this is approved, and it was looked at again this year in preparation for a bill like this, because we had a bill like this last year. And our membership reaffirmed that they oppose any state or federal action that would force cities into having partisan elections. And that's for two reasons. One, like I already highlighted, we don't deal with partisan issues very much at the city level. But two, cities already have the ability to have partisan elections if they wish to do so. Under KSA 25-2113, cities are able to do that, and the vast majority have chosen not to have partisan elections. Senate Bill 210 would supplant this local decision, not with the state or federal action, but with one person's action, and allowing one person to make an election partisan, invalidating local ordinances that have established election policies for the cities across our state. The League is opposed to this measure as it has the effect of limiting the candidate pool for city elections and could prohibit good, qualified candidates from seeking and holding public office. One, because, like I said, we don't deal with partisan issues very much. People may not want to work on partisan issues, and if they believe that party affiliation is important for city work, they may just avoid it. And another thing to highlight, and it was mentioned by a prior conferee, the Federal Hatch Act and DOD Directive 1344.1 10 prohibits federal employees and active duty military, as well as some reserve components, it depends on how many days in a year that they serve, from participating in partisan election activity. So for the purposes of these laws and for the DoD directive, an election is partisan unless none of the candidates nominated for the party, nominated for the position has a party listed. So in the case of a federal employee or a service member, a candidate could utilize Senate Bill 210 to eliminate their competition, to keep people from running against them simply by listing their own political party. And we do actually have local governing bodies that this will affect. One city submitted written only testimony but they have 2 current members of their governing body that this bill could have the effect of eliminating those individuals from continued service. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we oppose Senate Bill 210, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Time right on the nose, John. Thank you. Next up is Scott Rothschild, Kansas Association of School Boards. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Scott Rothschild. I'm with the Kansas Association of School Boards. We represent all 286 school districts in the state of Kansas. KASB believes that introducing partisan politics into school board elections and then the operation of school boards would be a harmful distraction from the extremely important and nonpartisan job of educating our Kansas students. There is no evidence to suggest that making local school board elections partisan will advance the cause of school education, which is crucial to the future of our state. Another reason school board elections are nonpartisan is because declaring a party would make certain persons, such as military or executive branch employees, out of the ability to run and hold office. While this bill doesn't provide that school board members would have to declare a party, it would seem that one's declaring a party may be an advantage over someone who could not. The major issues schools are trying to address now is the need for additional funding of special education and being able to recruit and retain teachers and staff. Making school board elections more partisan will do nothing to help these issues, which will require ideas and heavy lifting from all sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And our final oral opponent is Michael Papa, Executive Director, Mainstream Coalition. Michael joins us via WebEx. Michael, are you there?
Yes, sir. Chair Thompson, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony on SB 210 today. As you mentioned, I'm Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition, and we do oppose SB 210. Earlier proponent testimony had mentioned transparency as far as letting voters know who's on their ballots, an easy way of finding information out about them. Well, candidates can already unofficially align with the party in a nonpartisan election. They don't have to declare it on the ballot. And this bill would boil down candidates to just a single letter. And so it would also assume that that candidate, by having that letter next to their name, is in lockstep with any party platform, which in my experience is not true at the local level. Voter engagement, voter turnout was also mentioned in my first race in 2015. I also serve as a local elected official in a nonpartisan office. In my first race, voter turnout was 36% in my race. And that seems to track across our community, and it seems to grow every year in the nonpartisan local elections. You've heard all the other points from the conferees. Local elections keep the emphasis on the candidates and the communities over party politics. I believe, and I've experienced that there's more collaboration between elected officials at the local level when they are not branded by parties. And the Hatch Act was mentioned a couple of times. This would disenfranchise an entire pool of people by banning otherwise eligible Kansans from participating in our civic process. And as mentioned, one person in that race can knock out their opponent if they wanted to, just by putting a letter next to their name. Local communities already have the opportunity to make their elections partisan. This is not a one-size-fits-all situation, because as we heard earlier on the other bill, one size does not fit every community. So we ask you to please do not take away our local control, and we urge you to oppose SB 210 to help keep our local elections accessible, nonpartisan, and fair. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I stand for questions when appropriate.
Thank you, Michael. Committee, we do have some written-only opponents listed on your agenda. There's about 6 of those. And we will reset the clock and open for questions for either the proponents or opponents. We'll give it 5 minutes, committee, and we'll start with Senator Schwab, or Senator Schwab, Senator Straub. Thinking of tongue-tied. Senator Straub.
It's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Scott. Does the Kansas Association of School Boards engage in partisan issues at the Capitol every day?
Well, the KASB is a nonpartisan organization, and we participate in issues that affect public education. And I think some of those are, you could say are partisan, but our goal is basically to advocate for public school students and school boards.
Sure. And who pays the dues to the Association of School Boards?
The school districts. The school boards pay dues to the Kansas Association of School Boards.
So the taxpayers in those school districts pay the dues to the Association of School Boards, and the Association of School Boards engages in partisan issues at the Capitol with legislators, with elected officials every day. I think this bill is a great example of how the public needs to know who's who and what they stand for. And it's a great way to give people the option of giving a designation of who they are on the ballot. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could respond, or.
Yes, go ahead.
We're a nonpartisan organization. We are supportive of issues that promote success of public school students, whether Republican or Democrat or an unaffiliated person supports that.
Okay. Senator Holscher, then Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my question probably would be best with John Goodyear. You talked about the Hatch Act, as a few other people mentioned, and I just want to make sure I do clearly understand this, that if, let's say, I'm running and I declare that I want my party listed, if my friend Mike here is running and he's a federal employee, he can't run now.
Yes, that is correct. If any candidate for an elected office lists a party, that election is considered partisan for the purposes of the Hatch Act for the DOD directive, and that would invalidate would prohibit those candidates from running, or they could choose to quit their job and choose to leave the military, or choose to violate federal law. But we wouldn't encourage that. Yes, it would prohibit those individuals from running.
And if he didn't want to,
even if they don't list a party affiliation, if one candidate lists a party affiliation, it would prevent any other.
This invalidates all local ordinances on the issue then?
Yeah, specifically there's a provision there at the end of new subsection C that any ordinance in conflict with this provision is now invalid. And a couple of different cities that submitted testimony raised that as a concern. City of Topeka, for example, established nonpartisan elections as part of their charter ordinance where they adopted their form of government. So if this were to take effect, the City of Topeka would be scrambling to readopt their form of government and any other provision in that charter ordinance, which would take at least 62 days to adopt with publication deadlines and everything.
Okay. Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, I have a question for you as well. Since Senator Straub actually really brought this, kind of sparked a lot of thoughts, questions I've had in my mind for a while, since you sit in most committees and every day in education, which Senator Straub and I are both member of. How does the Association of School Boards take a position on things? What's your process?
Thank you, Senator. We have a delegate assembly that represents every school board in the state, which adopts our resolutions. Before we get to that point, we have a committee set up that looks at our resolutions. The advocacy staff goes out on the road to our 10 regional locations. We talk to school board members. So every year we go through this process of putting together state resolutions and priorities, and they are basically vetted on the road, and they are vetted in committee, and they are vetted by the delegate assembly, which is several hundred people, and they approve those, and that's what we produce is our state resolutions.
And so every school board in the state of Kansas is a member of your association?
Yes.
Dues paying?
Yes.
Is there by chance that, can we know how much each school district is paying at some point? You don't say now, but
Right,
I'd
I
love to
don't
see.
know. I
Because
don't-
I've talked to my school board members and many parents in my school district where my child goes, and they're shocked by some of the positions your association takes. It's just, I think Senator Straub hit on the head. You tend to be a partisan organization, not necessarily looking out for the best interest of all public schools. Thank you.
Senator Reichman, last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John Goodyear brought this up, and I would like to have a clarification from the legal aspect on them, because if he said that if one person declared that they were a political party, then under the Hatch Act, that if you're a federal employee or active military duty, then you cannot participate in that. I would like to have a clarification on that, because if it is true, I think that's this bill be problematic.
Could we get a clarification from our revisor on that? And I too, that was sort of along the same lines that I have. The states, as I understand it, have the ability to run their own elections. And does the state's authority conflict with the supremacy clause? Would like to have some kind of, and Jason, if you need to look into that before, please say whatever you need to say on that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Hatch Act provisions I believe that Mr. Goodyear is referring to are applicable to federal employees, which state election laws would not supersede any provisions that are essentially employment regulations by the federal government. I will be happy to look into those provisions further, and I can get back to the committee on what the federal act requires of its employees with respect to standing for election for a local office.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. Committee, we're out of time. We do have the two bills we heard today, also Senate Bill 92, Senate Bill 209, and Senate Bill 221. Those are the outstanding ones. We will work some bills tomorrow. I'm not sure we'll get to all of them, but we'll see. And that will be the end of our work before turnaround. So thank you for your work today, committee, and we are adjourned.